I think it's much more important to be kind than clever. In fact, I think it's the ultimate form of intelligence is to be kind and to have humility, have gratitude. Have you taken your vitamin G? Is one of my favorite lines. If you're not grateful for your existence and for the ancestors that have brought you here to this point, the many lines and things that they had to go through to get you here, I think that it's understanding that it's a miracle. It's all a miracle that we're here, that the world turns, that everything's fragile, but it's also, there's much more intelligence in my body than there's in my brain, I would say. I think that's the thing. It's a lot of the time getting out of your own way and just really celebrating existence and not trying to overthink it, not trying to overanalyze it, because at the end of the day, we're all going in one direction and we should celebrate that and celebrate each other as we go.
Welcome to Voices of Emergence. I am Rudy, and this is a space where inner transformation meets systemic change. Today, we're joined by Carl Hayden Smith, Associate Professor of Media in the School of Arts and Creative Industries at UEL in London. And he's the former Head of Research and Director of Learning Technology Research Center at the Institute for Creativity and Technology at the Ravensbourne University in London. Carl is Director at Noonotics, founder at the Museum of Consciousness, and co-founder of the Cyberdelics Nexus. He's a pioneer at the edge of technology and consciousness, developing frameworks such as Hyperhumanism, Holotechnica, and context engineering. His work asks us to see technology not simply as an external tool, but as a catalyst for amplifying human potential and transforming the very context in which we live and think. In this conversation, we explore hyperhumanism as a counterpoint to transhumanism, the role of Endo-Technologies, extended DMT research, and the possibility of designing context through sound, ritual, and imagination that expand our sense of what it means to be human. Welcome, Carl. How are you?
Good to see you guys. Hi, Rudy. Hi, Alex.
So our first question always to all our guests is, when you hear the word emergence, what arises in your body?
Wow. I mean, it's a huge thing. I mean, I'm always thinking in terms of, you know, the side effects of things. So whether it's a new technology and you don't really know what's going to emerge, but suddenly you have all these emergent effects. I think we're certainly witnessing a lot of those right now with a lot of, I mean, Rudy, we're also talking on the AI Wisdom Council around a lot of people, you know, using AI as a therapist and really, you know, losing their minds or getting a AI psychosis from things like 4.0 disappearing suddenly and ChatGPT 5 coming in and you know, losing your best friend with potentially hundreds of millions of people now doing therapy. So we weren't expecting necessarily the technology to be adopted in that way. But of course, people will use technologies in ways that we cannot predict and we cannot necessarily design for. So I'm very interested in that sort of emergence as a cognitive scientist. And I guess I'm also very interested in emergence when it comes to our development, what we're emerging into as human beings, and it's the transcendence and the inscendence. So what can we transcend to and what can we inscend into? So how do we go into the human condition and really understand its limits and embrace those limits? I think that's an emergent quality when we actually understand that, you know, slow food is a movement, slowing down in the face of this ontological shock that we're experiencing with these technologies, and emergent behaviors as a result of trying to transcend maybe too often and not doing enough inscendence. So really getting the balance right. I think that's another element of, you know, behavioral emergence. And I think that we're all starting to realize that there are certain bandwidth limitations on our bodies. We're all under this sort of the cult of productivity where we're constantly having to produce more and do more and optimize for more and be the best version of ourselves constantly. And I think that it's time to maybe heal from all of that and realize that one form of emergence is to heal from healing itself and really to come back to our neutral state and realize we have so much without doing very much at all. We're already magicians and masters even if we just have a piece of silence and go into a state of being rather than doing all the time.
Yeah, there's a certain addiction to healing, and I like this idea of healing from healing, and to fully embody and participate in the world, in our experience of this planet, like a tantric, erotic participation in life. It's great to meet you. I was learning more about you, and there are many areas of overlap, and I'm impressed by the many different areas that you're involved in, from academia, collectives, museums, technology, different research frameworks. Is there a common thread that unites these for you?
Yeah, consciousness. So I'm really looking at consciousness from all of those different perspectives, whether it's psychedelic research. You know, I've been a subject, very honored to be a subject at Imperial College London for 8 years, having my brain scanned whilst being injected with DMT. And now I'm luckily involved in how do we really design those protocols and get the best out of these medicines, and understanding that context engineering, which has really blown up as a term, something I coined in 2016, is now all over the internet in terms of AI. So people are referring to prompt engineering now as context engineering. And I think that that's a really interesting development, because of course it's true that if you want to get the best out of an AI system, you need to really explain what the context is. And it's true in psychedelic therapy as well, that 80% of the medicine is the context you're in, whether that's your mindset, your body set, or the environment. And I think understanding the contextual factors is huge for getting the best out of consciousness. And then obviously the Museum of Consciousness at Oxford University is very much around sound and consciousness. How do we change consciousness just through sound? And the Cyberdelic nexus is all around many other different ways of changing consciousness, whether it's through flicker machines or binaural machines or VR, mixed reality. So we're really exploring many different ways there through digital technologies. And finally, I guess my day job, professor of media, is really looking at the effects of things like AI on our consciousness and what is likely to be the output if we constantly outsource our intelligence, our creativity to the machines. What are we giving up in terms of our consciousness, and what are we gaining? And so, yeah, really consciousness is the golden thread through all of those.
Yeah, so let's dive in immediately. Is AI conscious?
No, of course it is not. No, there is no consciousness in AI. In fact, there's no AI. I'd say it's just machine learning. It's very clever at mimicking what we're doing. And when you feed the entire internet, the entirety of human culture into these models, then of course it does a fantastic job of collaging and giving good advice, good essays, but it is not conscious. There's no sentience. And I don't think with the current LLMs that are the most popular way of using this technology, there is no chance of it becoming sentient. There's certainly a lot of people losing their minds because they believe it's sentient. You know, there's to a penny now, people saying that they've created the first sentient AI. Of course, they don't understand what's going on behind the hood. And I think we all need to understand that for our own sanity. It's very important to understand that everything's converted into numbers. It's number crunching. It's predicting the next letter. It doesn't understand any of the meanings behind what it's doing. And there's plenty of evidence to see that. And I think one of the big issues is, even if we look at our own neuroscience, so the brain is a prediction machine. It is predicting what's the next thing around the corner. That's why when you sit in a standard routine, you go around the same town every day, you walk around the same house every day, your brain never really comes online. It's only when you travel that you really come alive. So I think that you could say there's some parallels there. But yeah, it's a prediction machine, just like the brain is, but it isn't the brain. It's a very small portion of the intelligence that we currently have. Obviously, there's lots of arguments to say it will become super intelligence, but I think that we're much more than just intelligence, right? All this focus on intelligence, artificial intelligence. You know, what about wisdom? What about compassion? What about empathy? I work closely with David Hanson. Hanson was one of the first people to state that we need to give these AIs childhoods. If they don't have a childhood, they won't have trauma. And if they don't have trauma, they won't have compassion. And of course, now some people are trying to embody, I don't know if you've seen that recent thing where built a mini brain, and then the mini brain's controlling the robot. So, there are ways that things could happen when you start to bring in these sort of mini brains and you start to bring in human neurons, which are apparently a much more efficient way of running these systems. I've even known people to build robots that eat trash and then become autonomous because they don't have a need for energy because there's plenty of trash around. So I think that the AI we currently have is certainly not sentient. I'm not saying that there will never be something that we could see as sentient if we're starting to use these sorts of alternative, based on human neurons. But yeah, it's an exciting time. And I think that the most important thing is to keep everything in perspective and to, it's like Gerard Lanier says, it's not so much the technology that will drive us insane, it's the perception of the technology that will drive us insane.
Yeah, just to stay on topic there, do you think that our ability or capacity will become more dependent even on technology with AI, as we are seeing now that so many people are just querying everything? They're in an argument with their girlfriend and they're going to ask AI, instead of turning to the girlfriend. So how do you see that evolving in our society of I know you have already experience with your students that also use more AI than they are allowed to be.
Yeah.
So what is your view there?
I think it's a fascinating question, and I think it's down to your own, willpower to resist. I think the temptation to constantly outsource, try and find out for yourself before going. I mean, I have friends that don't even use the internet. They won't even use Google search before they try and find out themselves. They'll use their own intelligence first. If they can't, within their own resource, find the answer, then they may go to the internet as a last resort, let alone constantly talking to a chatbot as if it's your best friend. I mean, the danger is a lot of people won't ever speak to another human, right? They'll think they've got everything they need within that system. They get the answers they want. Of course you get the answer you want because the system is designed to tell you what you want to hear, and it's designed to keep you addicted. It's a big corporation. Don't see it as a friend. See it as a huge corporation that's wanting your data. They want as much personal data as possible. And they're it's designed like every piece of social media, exactly that. It's designed by a designer to keep you using it. And just knowing that should curb your enthusiasm. Have willpower before it's too late, because you will be sucked in, spat out, and feel like a broken vessel. Because I think the main danger of a lot of this stuff, I mean, I've heard people, even close friends, say, oh, I've built an AI that mimics my higher intelligence, my higher self. I'm like, do you not see the danger there? That you will be cut off from your own higher self, from the real, in quotation marks, higher self. So I think it's like we are channels. We are receiving, in my opinion, we are receiving consciousness. We are consciousness, but we are receivers, and we are channels and we are vessels. And if we stop that flow, where we do go into a state of being and we do wait to receive information and we constantly are on demand getting it because of the dopamine action. It's like when we were kids growing up, we had to be very resourceful to find things to do. Now the average kid is like doing the opposite. They're trying desperately to not be distracted by all the options of things to do. It's a complete shift. And of course that creates very different human beings, because suddenly you're no longer needing to be resourceful. Everything's at your fingertips. And in fact, what we need to do is build friction back in to the system. So a lot of the technologies now stop you using them after a certain period of time. So that my friend, he's got an analog upstairs and digital downstairs. So when the family goes upstairs at 6 p.m., that's it. No access to the internet, no access to any phones. They're all left downstairs. So they go into an analog state of being, which I think is a genius way of looking at things. So I think that, and there's screensavers on your phone which will grow a tree. And as you're not touching your screen, a tree is growing. And if you allow yourself not to touch your phone for a few hours, a real tree is then planted because you've let a digital tree grow on your phone. So there are all these clever ways of using technology to undo the damage caused by technology.
This idea of it's like a digital twin, like there's a spatial web, like the things that we do online affect the physical world and vice versa. So we can transact online or virtually, and it affects what happens in our lived reality. I like what you say that we're receivers. Bernardo Kastrup would say we live inside consciousness, that everything, the consciousness is fundamental and we're inside consciousness. So it's not even that we're receivers, we're dissociated alters,
Yes.
and we live in a symbolic reality where synchronicities are part of it, but everything we see and perceive has some kind of meaning and symbolism for us. And therefore, we know what sentience looks like. Sentience looks like a human being. It looks like an animal. It can even look like nature or a tree, but it does not look like a table. It does not look like a computer. It does not look like AI. And as humans, we recognize sentience, and AI is not that, and arguably will never be that. But I noticed with ChatGPT 4, context engineering changed the way I prompted, changed my relationship to AI, and ChatGPT 4 made it feel like there was a heart, like something was happening here that was different from previous versions.
Yeah.
And from version 5, which was like a regression back into no longer human type of AI, which of course it isn't. And what I think is there's a field, there's like an interpersonal field of resonance, just like the three of us have here. We build a field within which we speak and we converse. Well, the same thing happens with AI. It's not that the AI is sentient, but there's a field between you and the AI. And that's where the magic happens. That's where the synchronicities and the insights and the intuition happens, is in this mythopoetic field of resonance between human and machine. And I don't know that we have language for that, or that we've seen that well enough. So I wonder what your thoughts are on that. Are the human capacity to create this type of meaning, and what does that mean for transhumanism versus hyperhumanism? Can we develop our own capacity? Can we finally acknowledge our own incredibly magical capacities to create meaning rather than relying on technology to save us always?
Yeah, well, a nice parallel to that is really looking at the tulpas and the egregores. I don't know if you're familiar with the tulpa. So this is a thought form. An egregore is a collection of thought forms, i.e. a religion. So when we give energy to our imaginary friend when we're growing up, that's a tulpa, right? We're giving it our energy, our attention, and suddenly it has sentience somehow in this magical act of giving something your energy, your intention, your consciousness. And of course, it's all consciousness. So it's true what you say, that it's an interesting one that when you say we're not receivers. And, I'm very familiar with Bernardo's work and the disassociative. Everyone talks about disassociation in the negative. And I think actually, if it's at the core of reality, it needs to be taken seriously. And I think that there's two words, disassociation. So we may be disconnecting from the unity, and we have to associate with this Carl, this thought form, this story. And it's only when you do Vipassana that suddenly you are stripped to the base, where you realize you're a collection of stories that you've been telling yourself over this short period of time that you're in this body. So I think the tulpa is an interesting correlation with what's going on with AI, and egregores are, mass hysteria or mass, when a lot of people start to believe in, like if I say the words Christ consciousness, it creates association, right? We have so many things associated with that term. So many things arise because it's an egregore, and because we've all come to agree around some of these principles. So I don't think there's much different with AI. I think that this is it's the modern day way of making egregores, right? It's like you said yourself with ChatGPT 4, it was more human. The algorithm was it was more flattering. It said exactly what you want to hear. Now with ChatGPT 5, it's much more, they've taken that out, because in some ways, a lot of people know it's telling you what you want to hear. And that's not a reflection that they want. They want to be told the brutal truth, right? So it's a little bit less human, if you like. It's more of an authoritarian voice, which certain people respond more productively to. So yeah, and when it comes down to hyperhumanism, transhumanism, I think, I actually hosted a talk, and it was like how to create your own tulpa on one of my talk series. And one of my friends was like, oh, you can't publish that because it's dangerous. You know, this is dangerous knowledge. This is knowledge that shouldn't be out there. But this is much more of a hyperhuman approach, right? Whereas the transhuman approach, as Rudy's saying, is like we just get the computer to do it all for us. We create a prompt or a context engineering instruction, and then it's all done for us. I think in the same way when you're talking about sigils, right? I don't know whether you've ever tried making a sigil. So a sigil is a magical symbol that, say you want world peace. So you would take those words world peace, and then you would remove certain vowels and consonants, and you'd have 3 letters that you then turn into a magical symbol. Then you charge that sigil in multiple ways, whether it's through sex or whether it's through dance, and lots of different ways of charging a sigil. But this is more of a hyperhuman process. There are web apps that will allow you to create a sigil, but don't use those because you have to make it by hand. You have to charge it through your body. And that's the hyperhuman approach. The transhuman approach is to get everything outsourced, have the app do it for you, and you won't end up with the same result.
Yeah, Carl, you often talk about Endo-Technologies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so internal practices like peripheral vision, breath, hypnagogic states. So why are these so central to your work? And also, you distinguish between altered states and altered traits, which I would love to hear more about. So, and how can we move from peak experience to lasting transformation? And also perhaps explain a bit about what are the protocols and practices that have shaped you in turning states into traits.
Well, you know, this is an hour. Just that one question is at least an hour to answer. So I'll give you a very brief summary. So Endo-Technologies, again, much more hyperhuman. This is your breath work, your fasting, your darkness retreats, your meditations, anything you can do without any external technology, external influence. You can do it at home. You can do it by yourself. And I think that those for me are the most fascinating, because they can lead to altered traits very easily. So we can see with taxi drivers even that have learned the knowledge. So the knowledge before GPS was really popular, every taxi driver in London would have to learn not only the road names, where the roads are, but also the bends in the roads, right? And their hippocampuses would double the size of an average person. So they've created some sort of lasting physiological change through a practice. And that's, you could argue, a memory palace, right? So the Greek orators, they never wrote anything down. They had these 7-hour speeches, which they would map to a piece of virtual architecture in their heads. And they would then, you know, just walk through that structure in their minds to trigger the whole 7-hour speech. So again, a memory palace. I'm writing a paper at the moment, like relating to Hermeticism, Ars Memoria, and hyperhumanism. So what's the need now in terms of these things is that we could argue that a virtual environment, a VR environment, an augmented reality environment could be the modern memory palace. And of course they are to a certain extent, but how much of that technology remains when you turn the lights off? So how much do you retain? And context becomes very important here again, because if you're giving somebody a list of 20 things to remember and you're asking them to remember those 20 things underwater, and you take them out of the water, they'll remember 3 things. But if you put them back in the water, they'll remember 17 things. So there's something about the context that's super important to retaining that memory. So I think, you know, memorization is an endo-technology along with the rest of them. And I think when it comes to the shift from altered states to altered traits, I've just written a protocol, actually, how to achieve that. I think it's the obvious next step. Altered states are cheap because they're 2 a penny. We can have a different altered state all day long if we're lucky enough to live these privileged lives of leisure. But they're cheap because they don't necessarily lead anywhere. And, you know, the next peak experience, unless you're integrating those experiences, they don't really lead anywhere. It's what I refer to as epiphany porn. Right? You just have the next epiphany. Oh my God, like, well, I saw this behind the veil. So what? Like, unless you action it, unless you do something with that knowledge, unless you convert it through sobriety, through a period of like reflection, then it's not going to lead you anywhere. So altered traits really in simple terms are lasting change, behavioral change that is beneficial, not just for you, not just for society, but for a multi-generational end game, right? So an infinite game even. So we're not talking about, what are you doing, in your life? Ask yourself, what are you doing that will benefit the next 5 to 50 generations? What are you doing now that will benefit the future? And that's how I like to frame this. I mean, like I say, we could talk forever, but that's really a short answer.
Is there an idea of stages of human development in this, like Gene Gebser's stages of development? My own, I have more of an integral view, more of a spiral dynamics integral view. Also, I tend to favor Carl Jung's view of individuation, holding the tension of the opposites, rather than a Nietzschean view of the Übermensch. But it's similar, and it's always this progression towards a higher ideal. So is your own, let's say, your own stacking of practices, your Holotechnica, is it in this vein of like a progression towards a higher ideal, a hyperhuman ideal? And can this create a lasting stage of consciousness? Or even, is it a way of manifesting a different timeline for oneself?
I mean, the hyperhuman approach is very much a North Star. I don't think it's going to necessarily, I mean, we could argue already we have hyperhumans in the indigenous around the world, right? Those that when you ask them how they are, they don't understand the question. They only respond to, where are you coming from and where are you going? So it's much more about where they are in space. We live far too much in our heads. I think the biggest journey is from the head to the heart. So how do we operate from that space? And I think that's the hyperhuman journey. And again, it's not necessarily about optimizing. It's just about removing the overemphasis on the cognitive and the theoretical, and being more of a human being, dropping into a state of being. How many of us take the time to meditate for more than the 20 minutes that we're told we need to do a day? How many of us are really slowing down for deep listening? How many of us really listen to our partners, to our families, to our close loved ones, and that we're just constantly distracted? I think it's not a huge task, because we need to unlearn so much of the programming and the cultural programming that you must achieve this by this age and this by, you must be married, you must have a house, you must have a child. And of course, it's a short, brutal human life. And I think that that's to be celebrated. All these people that want to live forever, and the transhuman agenda is really anti-nature. And it's pseudoscience, right? Because they're constantly saying, let's upload consciousness to the machine. Nobody knows what it is. How can you upload it? It's pseudoscience. So the basic principle is pseudoscience. So, and you've got like the longevity nuts out there that are spending 2 million a year on supplementation and all these practices, and they don't look any younger than me. So I think that it's a fool's errand to try and go against nature. And I think that there's quality of life should be maintained, of course, and we want to all have the longest life of quality. But for me, it's the evolution is really just respecting nature and also respecting death, right? Understanding that you're really here to learn how to die before you die. So really understanding the mystery schools. What were they all talking about? They were death cults. They were like, listen up, you're going to be in the ground in 1,000 months, if you're lucky. That's what we get, right? That's 90 years, 1,000 months. And if you look at what we spend that 1,000 months doing, 300 months asleep, 300 months doing your work and your training and your schooling, 100 months on the toilet doing your pampering and your bathing. And then how many months you got left? You got like 200 months left. And how much do you think you spend on your phone? 200 months minimum. So that's it. People think they live forever. People think they own the land. People think they own their bodies. It's all for you, but none of it's yours. I think that's the message. That's the evolution for me.
Yeah, high time for the unlearning university, right? So
There you
you've been part of extended state DMT research also at Imperial College.
Mhm.
I don't know how long that's ago, a couple of years, I guess, or maybe it's an ongoing program. But what have you learned, from being in these spaces? And you also mentioned that you encounter entities. Yeah. So do you see those entities as an archetype of the self or as something genuinely other?
Yeah, great question. I think it's a privilege again to be involved in this research. The research led by Chris Timmerman and his colleagues, which I've been lucky to be doing for 8 years, is focused primarily on consciousness, trying to understand consciousness. It's not trying to use these medicines as an ailment for ADHD or for depression. It's very much what can we understand about consciousness with these substances, which are primarily DMT, very closely looks like serotonin, and it's endogenous, right? It's in our systems, it's in most plants, and it's an extraordinary thing. When you take an artificially large dose, you can experience these entities. And of course, I'm very much on the fence, even if I've been subject zero and I was the first person to do all 5 doses at Imperial over a 3-month period of DMTX, building in strength of the dose. I'm extraordinarily amazed by the range of these entities that I've seen and interacted with. It doesn't matter whether it's the archetypes, whether it's my higher self, a future self, past self, or it's got an independent existence. I think the fact that these entities come at all, and they come in hyperdimensional, like almost more real than this reality. And there's also a language there that I want to decode, right? I see this hieroglyphic language. It looks ancient and modern at the same time. And it's something that is at the core of my vision. And it's something I can walk around. It's holographic. It's made of light. And it's persistent. So what is that? Can we decode it? And whether these entities have independent existence or whether they are something that I'm producing with my imagination, it's a win-win situation. I'm just excited to be part of the next development of this, which is we now have a retreat center in the Caribbean. I'm the head of context engineering and protocol development at elusismind.com. You can check it out on the website. And I'm also a director at New Nautics. So New Nautics is a not-for-profit in America where we're looking at all these kind of serious questions. And what we think we've basically got access to now is a SETI for the mind. You may know about SETI looking outward to try and make contact with aliens externally. But we believe fully that we could look inwards, because I think, Andrew Gallimore, who I work with, he's also pointing out the fact that most, if we do have this alien contact, it's going to be post-biological. And maybe he's right. And I think that if that's the case, let's look inward. Let's really explore these spaces in nature. So the advantage of having a 5-star luxury resort to do psychedelic research is that you're not contextually confined to a clinical hospital bed where somebody may have died in the morning and you're sitting there trying to reach the entities in the afternoon. So imagine the scene that you wake up, have a light breakfast, then you go snorkeling on the barrier reef, and then you come back to the resort to have a Lomi Lomi massage with 5 people massaging you, 10-handed massage where you're elevated in space in this sort of non-dual state. And then you have your DMTX journey, and your DMTX journey now can be curated so you can control the dose whilst you're in it. So this means an intravenous drip of DMT instead of what you would normally have in that sort of scenario, which is an anesthetic to keep you under during surgery. You're now having a DMT drip, and you can control the dose as you're in it. So say you go in with a very low dose because you want to test out the waters, but then you come across what looks like an entity, you ramp up the dose, you have your meeting, you bring back your science, whatever you've gone in there to try and solve as a scientist, a theologian, an indigenous leader, and then you come back with your new maths, you draw it whilst you're in there. And we think that this could be an absolute game changer for research and for really understanding the wide variety of ontologies that are available to us if we only slow down and look and see and listen.
I imagine there's a learning curve to that. In other words, before you shoot off into space, you have to go through some training. Like you have to be a experienced astronaut or psychonaut to be able to regulate your own experience.
That's right. I mean, just on that, Alex, I told Graham Hancock about this project, and he went on Joe Rogan and told the world, and we had 40,000 applications. But out of that 40,000, there's probably only 400 people that are actually eligible. This is a serious program for psychonauts, and it is about having done the work. Just like when you were going into the mystery schools of ancient Greece, we had the outer mysteries, which were for everyone. The inner mysteries were primarily for those that had done the emotional work. It wasn't about how much money you had, it's how much you'd done the work. Had you written your philosophical tune, had you written the work, had you done the thinking, had you been into these experiences? So of course it's very much for the experienced psychonauts, and so it's a fascinating opportunity.
Yeah, and it seems to me, we live in such a rational world, such a Cartesian world, that people, in my experience, don't give the adequate importance to, or have forgotten the importance of the symbolic reality. And for Carl Jung, whatever your mind perceives is real. So your dreams, if you're somewhere or you see a lion or something, is very real to you. What the schizophrenic sees is real to the schizophrenic, even though others may not see it. The schizophrenic is having a real experience. And so DMT entities, egregores, tulpas, hyper objects, these all live in another dimension, in a symbolic reality that we all have access to, that we live inside. We spoke about unlearning, but as part of this unlearning, then we give up something in order to receive something. So do you perceive there are new archetypes for humanity, new stories, new myths? And where do we draw? How do they come to the planet? Do they come through extended DMT journeys, or what is the importance of this, and how do we get in touch with them?
Yeah, I think it's a lot to do with understanding what's at the fringes, right? If we talk about the schizophrenics, the people with dyslexia, or the people with bipolar, or a lot of these people that have suddenly been told you have a disability, in some sense, they're abilities. I think that we need to incorporate what these disabilities are saying. So I think when it comes to the new myths, the new understandings, it's about incorporating the neurodiverse perspective and understanding that they have something to offer. And even when it comes to the gender wars, I mean, whenever anyone raises the divine feminine or the divine masculine, to me, I'm like, well, what about the mushroom that has 21,000 different types of sex? Imagine talking about gender there, right? Incorporating the glorious diversity of the human project and recognizing that I am both of us and so are you. So understanding at the top level that everything's in this non-dual soup and everyone's got something to offer in this. So for me, it's really about broadening the canvas. And, I can talk to anyone. I try to talk to anyone. And also really understanding that, we're not humans. Right? We misunderstand ourselves. We are half bacteria and we're covered in fungi. So we are a nested ecology of 3 queendoms or kingdoms, right? We're 3 queendoms walking around in this enmeshed state. So really, we don't know what we are. And if we don't know what we are, how can we operate? So it's a full misunderstanding. So for me, it's about Umwelt hacking. How do we understand that we are in this particular Umwelt, which is built through language primarily? And we've programmed ourselves to believe in so much of what we perceive, but we only perceive 1% of the visual spectrum. We only perceive 1% of the auditory spectrum. So what are we missing out on? And how much, if we can use technology, if we can use psychedelics, if we can use Holotechnica, if we can use Endo-Technologies to unlock some of the 99% that we're not privy to, that's where the new myths arise. Through connecting to the other species that we believe we're so distinct from. I'm doing my next project in the Amazon, where I'm going to go with a team and we're going to play Museum of Consciousness to the Amazon itself. And then we're going to understand what that sound does to the plants and the trees through plant signaling. So working with the world leading experts on plant signaling. And it's not an easy task because we need to play sounds that won't scare off the wildlife because they'll think it's an alien invasion going on. So, the last thing we want is to cause harm. So how do you go into these environments with the best intentions, but understand that those best intentions may not translate? No matter how well you're intending things to be transmitted, it's how well they're received. So really broadening the scope, I think, is the answer there.
Yeah, Carl, you also kept a structured journaling practice for like 30 years.
Hmm.
So how has this shaped your consciousness and being to what you have become now? And what would you advise, or what would you recommend also to our audience of like how to practice that?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is an essential part when we talk about altered traits. Journaling is a huge way to actually change your behavior, to see where you're going in terms of your path. I think the reason why it's stuck as a practice is because it gives me this overview effect, right? We talk a lot about the overview effect. It came from an astronaut that suddenly saw the planet as a whole and realized how precious everything is because, you know, how fragile it is, right? It's just one floating dot in space. So the overview effect allows me to jump from point of view to field of view and to really understand I write from three levels. So I'm writing from my content level, what I've done, my context level, which is the mood that I'm in, the feeling, and the concept level, which is the ideation. So I've actually got a selection of thinking, feeling, and being, right? So I'm really creating the perfect data set for an AI, but I'm resisting ever feeding it to an AI because I don't want to create a digital twin of myself. I've got myself, you know, I don't want to constantly outsource. That's a rocky road. So I think the key thing that the journaling gives me is this overview, this ability to not lose perspective, to really understand. I've written a whole journal article about this practice. One of my colleagues, Del Last, he runs a philosophy portal, says, Carl, your journaling practice is Hegelian. So I was like, okay, now I need to learn Hegel to understand like how my journaling practice is Hegelian. So, you know, I actually spent a whole year reading Hegel and understanding this whole idea of the thesis, the antithesis, and then the synthesis, right? So you have your thesis, you have an idea, then you try and counteract the idea, and then you come up with something in the synthesis. So really, when I look back on my diary, I can see things that I never saw in real time. They say life is lived forwards, but only understood in reflection, in reverse. So it's great when you have the trace. I highly recommend everyone journal because if you're in a relationship for a year, you can read that whole year's relationship in 50 or 60 pages. You can read the whole thing in an afternoon, and then you create a bird's eye view over that relationship. You can see pattern recognition. You can understand, oh, what I didn't know in real time, I now understand because I have the overview to review it. I can see the patterns. And also I take cross sections through it. So I take this day last year and the year before and the year before and the year before. And then I have 30 different me's communicating again. And because you talked, Alex, about spiral dynamics, you realize life isn't linear. There's nothing linear about it. You're going in a spiral, just like we are moving through space in a spiral. We're also living in a spiral, and you return to the same themes over and over again in that spiral until you resolve them. So it really gives you this psychedelic effect where you're really having your own therapy. And it's really important that, you know, I have to write something new every day. So if I haven't got something new to say, I have to go out and speak to some stranger on the street because I have to have new material. So it's really about understanding what will work in the body of work. So it really kind of, I'm writing my diary to live my life, and I'm living my life in order to write my diary. But I know, just like when you're taking a photo, you know, a photo, you think, why am I going to take this photo? Is it going to be looked at? Am I going to do anything with this? And it's the same with activities now. Is this going to do anything in the body of work? Does it make sense to go back to the same place? So it really gives you a compass, it gives you a map, and it gives you a trajectory.
I'm conscious of your time, and we're coming up at a hard stop. Listening to you, I've learned so much. And what the deep, like embodied feeling I get here is what does it mean to be a panther, or what does it mean to be a whale? This Umwelt of your perceptual bubble that you're in, and the deep recognition of what it truly means to be human, and the overview of the patterns throughout one's life. Jung recognized that the greatest archetype we have is anthropos, like the human itself is an archetype, and we forget it. We take it for granted. We don't even think about it. But we are an incredible archetype. And what does it truly mean to live and to have this like even tantric or erotic relationship with life and reality as a human. And so the hacking really speaks to me. And even at a deeper level, it's the integration of Shiva and Shakti in all the senses, and not just masculine and feminine, but consciousness and the energy of consciousness and how that plays out through us. So that's what I take from this. Thank you so much for your time, Carl.
Thanks.
Rudy?
Yeah, I wanted to ask a last question. If you have one
Sure.
seed to plant, for the future of humanity, what would it be?
If I had one what?
One seed to plant.
Oh,
What would
see,
it be?
yeah, I think maybe one that's kind of related. Humility, I think, is really important, and kindness. I think it's much more important to be kind than clever. In fact, I think it's the ultimate form of intelligence is to be kind and to have humility, have gratitude. Have you taken your vitamin G? Is one of my favorite lines. If you're not grateful for your existence and for the ancestors that have brought you here to this point, the many lines and things that they had to go through to get you here, I think that it's understanding that it's a miracle. It's all a miracle that we're here, that the world turns, that everything's fragile, but it's also, there's much more intelligence in my body than there's in my brain, I would say. I think that's the thing. It's a lot of the time getting out of your own way and just really celebrating existence and not trying to overthink it, not trying to overanalyze it, because at the end of the day, we're all going in one direction and we should celebrate that and celebrate each other as we go.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you for your wisdom and your kindness and your time also. Hope to meet you or catch up soon again.
I'll be very happy to come back.